If you go to Mexico and you look at the surrogates, they're not wealthy individuals with high IQ, education. They're these poor women that are being completely manipulated, exploited, and mistreated by the surrogacy lobby. And I still have to say, I haven't seen a rich woman carrying a baby for a poor woman.
Today, we are joined by Olivia Maurel, who was born via surrogacy and didn't find out until much later in life. She has spent years of her life feeling abandoned and like she didn't belong, and today she is speaking out about what she says are the dangers of the surrogacy industry. She joins us to share her story. Olivia, it's so good to have you on. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your story, your own background? I know you're a child born through surrogacy, and that's something that you didn't find out until later in life.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. It's a huge pleasure to be here actually and to speak to you. So I was born via surrogacy in 1991 in Kentucky, Louisville to be exact, in the United States of America. I was born through traditional surrogacy, so my surrogate mother was also my genetic mother. And I grew up in in a perfect household where everything was fine. I mean, my parents were very rich. I was raised by nannies most of the time. I had absolutely everything that I wanted. And growing up, I just knew something was off. Like I felt that there was something wrong with how how my mother looked, and like I didn't look like her. So I couldn't identify to my mother. And there was this like emotional distance as well with my mother, I have to say. No, not a real connection between she and I. And so I grew up and I started having a lot of questions, identity questions. I was starting to question if she was really my mother. Later on and during my adolescent years, I went into drugs, alcohol. I went through a lot, I have to say, because I was constantly searching for my identity. And then one day, around 17 years old, I opened up Google, and that's when I started doing research on the city I was born in. Because neither of my parents were American. My mother is my intended mother or commissioning mother, whatever you want to call her. She was French, and my father, my biological father, was Swiss. So they had, I didn't know why they went to America. Like, why would my mother give birth over there? So I opened up Google, made some research. At first, I didn't look surrogacy straight away because it wasn't like, I didn't know it was a thing back then. And I looked up adoption agencies, but very quickly, like on Google, the first things that came up were surrogacy agencies. And so I went and I looked into surrogacy agencies. I went and researched surrogacy like all night long. And at the end, I was just like, okay, this is how I was born. And that's when I started telling everyone around me, except for my parents, that I was born by a surrogacy. I told my friends, I told my boyfriends, I told my doctors, I told everyone except for my parents because I was just afraid of confronting them, and I was afraid of their reaction. I was afraid they would completely reject me. And I was right to do so, actually. And so I kept on but it was kind of like, it was still a gut feeling. It was like this thing I always felt was wrong, and I just put a word on that gut feeling I had since I was a young little girl. And it was only until I was 30 years old when my mother-in-law, my husband's mother, gifted me a DNA test. And that DNA test would reveal that I'm not French. I'm in very large part Lithuanian and Swiss. And it connected me with my cousin, and then she connected me with my half brother, my half sisters, and then eventually I would talk to my surrogate mother.
So Olivia, what age are you now? This is all very recent.
When I was 30, so I'm 33 actually, I discovered all this in January 2023.
Okay, really, really recently.
Yes.
And so you were brought up not knowing that you were born via a surrogate. That just wasn't revealed to you.
No.
I mean, do you know at this stage, like, do you know now how your birth came about? What were the circumstances or why your parents chose surrogacy?
So yeah, it's true that my parents didn't want to tell me. They kind of made the bet and just went along with not telling me and omitting the fact that I was born via surrogacy. I mean, there are parents that will tell their children. I've met, I have to say, a lot of children born via surrogacy, and we still talk today. And they all knew since they were born, and especially baby M. I don't know if you know her, but she's like the first case that went to court in the United States back in the 80s, and she knew since the beginning, and she's still traumatized about it. So it's not like it wasn't the lie isn't the problem. That's what I'm trying to say. It's really just being ripped away from your mother at birth and then not knowing your identity, not knowing your medical records, not knowing your genetics actually. That was the real problem. Um and so I did I did hear about the circumstances of my birth when I started talking to my surrogate because she answered all of the questions that I needed. Um, so my intended mother was old. Well, she's not old, but she was 50 when she decided to have me. So, and she had fertility issues in the past. So surrogacy was the only option for my parents because, well, they didn't want to adopt a child. They wanted a genetic, like, they wanted a baby that was genetically linked to either one of them. So my father, in my case. And so they went on with that. And when I was born, so my parents chose an agency. They had a first surrogate that was chosen, didn't work out. So they were matched with another surrogate who was my surrogate mother. And that's how they got me.
And this is in Kentucky. You were born in Kentucky?
Yes, yes, yes. This is in Kentucky, and I was born in Kentucky. And then I was raised in Florida later on in life.
Okay, so the circumstances, Olivia, are really, I suppose, infertility, that maybe your mother, her biological clock just she was too
Yeah,
old
yeah,
to have you biologically. So
exactly.
surrogacy, so surrogacy was something that was presented to them. What's unusual about your case, I suppose, is that, if I have this right, your birth was traditional surrogacy, so not altruistic.
So it wasn't altruistic, if you wanted to say. I mean, like you say in the UK, I mean you call it altruistic in the UK, which I find is funny because it's not altruistic because there's still money involved, and the surrogate is still being paid, still being reimbursed large amounts of fees. And even in the UK, you've got 80-year-olds buying babies, so it's not that altruistic, but it's traditional. But we have to make the distinction between it's not traditional and altruistic. It's traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy. So in traditional surrogacy, the baby inside the womb is genetically linked to the surrogate mother. In a gestational surrogacy, the mother is kind of spliced into three. So you've got the genetic mother who gave her eggs. You've got the birth mother who is literally making the baby, and she is the mother of the baby because she gave birth to the baby. And you've got the mother, the social mother, the one that's going to raise the child, which I find is worse than traditional surrogacy because I only had to look for one other woman that I did not know of. I had my social mother. I just had to look for my genetic and birth mother, who was just in one. All these other kids that are born by surrogacy, via gestational surrogacy, they have to look for two other mothers, their genetic mother and their birth mother, which I find is horrible, is absolutely horrible. And traditional surrogacy, like my surrogacy, still happens in the UK.
In your case, Olivia, you talk about, and you talk quite powerfully about, this concept of feeling as though there was a price tag on your head. So your case, you were born via commercial surrogacy. Was there money exchanged?
Yes, there was money exchanged in my case. I have no idea how much, but I know that, I mean, and even in altruistic surrogacy, there's still money involved. Agencies have to be paid, lawyers have to be paid, the fertility clinic has to be paid, the egg donation still has to be paid, the sperm donation still. There's a lot of money that's involved, even if you do altruistic surrogacy. So in altruistic surrogacy, these babies have a price tag on their heads anyways. So the problem with having a price tag on your head is that you grow up with this idea that you kind of owe your parents your life. They did so much to have you. They went through so much to have you. They paid large large amounts of money to have you. And so you don't want to betray them. So if you're against surrogacy like I was profoundly against surrogacy. I wanted to speak about surrogacy. I wanted to speak against surrogacy. And I was just afraid of my parents because I was afraid to break their loyalty. So I had this really big loyalty conflict with my parents during my entire life because of the money that was exchanged. It that's why I didn't speak up until now.
And I mean, Olivia, in terms of like in Ireland here, we have legislation that came into force very recently. It's actually there's some questions about it at the minute because of human trafficking concerns. But
Mm-hmm.
what I would notice in the surrogacy debate, and I'm sure a lot of people notice, is that it is something that is very difficult to speak out on. We have a couple of politicians in Ireland, a couple of senators. There's a senator called Sharon Keoghan, and there's another one called Ronan Mullen. And they've spoken out about surrogacy, but they get massive pushback for doing that. Why do you think it's, I mean, I'm sure you're the same. Why do you think it's so controversial to even have a conversation about surrogacy, about the potential negative impacts or the dangers of the industry?
There's so much to say about that one question. The first thing is that the people that make the laws usually have had surrogacy. Like they went through surrogacy, they had a child via surrogacy. And I think in the case of Ireland, the woman that pushed the law had a baby through surrogacy, if I'm not mistaken. So there's that. So you've got a lot of politicians that that went through surrogacy and that want to push laws to promote surrogacy because they're biased. They're completely biased. Secondly, I'd say the media has a huge role in this because we only present like the beautiful stories, how surrogacy is just marvelous. It creates families. It's this wonderful tool that we can use to fight against fertility. And that's how surrogacy is portrayed in the media. And so people are constantly brainwashed with these images on social media as well. You've got influencers that go and have babies through surrogacy. You've got Kim Kardashian that goes and has a baby via surrogacy, Paris Hilton. So people think that it's cool to have surrogacy, to go through surrogacy, and they don't really dig deeper. They don't look at what surrogacy really is. And that's well, I mean, it's for me human exploitation. And and so and the third thing I'd want to say about this subject is that there is no international consensus on surrogacy. Like we tend to believe that, well, everyone's for surrogacy. That's how, when I speak to people, everyone's like, oh, well, the whole world's for surrogacy. Like we can't stop it. Yes, we can stop it. There's no international consensus. Most countries prohibit it. So, I mean, or they don't authorize it. They didn't legalize it. So we're still in a situation where we do have the upper hand. So it's we're lucky. We're fighting this battle against this giant monster, which is the pro surrogacy lobby, and it's gonna be worth $100 billion by 2032. So this is a huge lobby. It's a lot of money. There's a lot of money at stake, and they're doing everything to push laws for surrogacy in every single country in this world, and we're doing everything with not a lot of money to try and ban surrogacy in certain countries.
And you did, when I was researching your story, I saw a post on your Instagram and you'd met with, when he was alive, Pope Francis. So you did,
Yes, yes.
yeah, I thought that was so interesting. So what was that meeting? Because obviously he has spoken out, and the Catholic Church's position on surrogacy is, they raised, various concerns about surrogacy and the dignity of the human person. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so would you tell us a bit
How,
about that?
how, I would love to. It was, I mean, when he passed away, I have to say I did cry a lot. I'm an atheist, by the way, so this was kind of the strangest, and a feminist, so it was the strangest meeting in the world, but it happened. And that's why, I mean, I work for the Declaration of Casablanca, which is our NGO, and we're fighting for the abolition of surrogacy. And we're like feminists. where the Catholics are Muslims, there are, they're atheists. There's like this whole melting pot of people, and it's so beautiful to see all these people that have nothing to do with each other, and we're just like so we're fighting this together, this one subject together. And so what really happened with Pope Francis is that the radio of the bishops of Spain interviewed Ana Obregón. I don't know if you know about her, but she's a famous Spanish actress, and she had a son who died of cancer. And before he died, they took his sperm. And what she did is that she went to Florida and she had a surrogacy with the sperm of her deceased son and a surrogate. And she came back with a baby, and she presented this like beautiful story on the radio. And I listened to the interview and I was shocked. I was profoundly shocked because I just knew that the Catholic Church was against surrogacy. It was obvious to me as an atheist. But then again, on the show, they were presenting her as this like wonderful person, that this beautiful thing, and that has this beautiful little girl that's going to grow up with no father, no mother, and on her birth certificate her grandmother is going to be her mother. Like I was just like, okay, like wow. So I wrote to this radio, they didn't respond. I wrote to the Bishop of Spain, he didn't respond. And I was like, okay, well, this is in December, yeah, to December 2023. And in December 2023, I'm like, okay, well, too bad. I'm going to write to the Pope, If he doesn't respond, it doesn't matter. And so I wrote to him about that story. And I told him, I was like, okay, well, I'm atheist. I know the Catholic Church is against this. Please, could you at least say it again, maybe? And so on the 8th of January, he made a speech in front of the diplomatic corps. And he said that the Catholic Church was against surrogacy. And that was in 2024. And then I received a letter from the Pope inviting me in a private meeting to meet him in his at the Vatican. And when I received the letter, I was kind of shocked. Like, oh gosh, what am I gonna tell him? Like, okay, let's go. So we went. He was a brilliant man, funny, kind, humble, just this beautiful person that opened his arms. And like the first thing I told him, well, of course, apart from saying hello and thanking him for having me, I was like, okay, well, I have to admit, I am a feminist. I am atheist. Like, we don't agree on 99% of others, of other things. But on this particular subject, we do agree, and we need to fight together. And he said yes. So he told me like multiple times that it was a huge market. He told me multiple times that it was human exploitation, that we were exploiting poor women, that it was a catastrophe. And he talked about microchimerism, the fact that, the DNA of the baby stays inside of the mother for 30 years. And I thought it was amazing. That because I do speak to a lot of high placed people, ministers, state presidents. And he was the first one that talked to me about microchimerism, which was incredible to me. And so, yeah, at the end, he told us that he was going to support the Declaration of Casablanca, and the Vatican has been a big support in this, I have to say.
So interesting. Thank you for explaining that, Olivia. So
it was he bless his soul. He was a beautiful person, really.
It really caught my attention. One of the main thing that comes across in your story is, and in the testimonies, I've watched you give testimonies, is the trauma of abandonment. That's the big thing you talk about. Would you explain what that means for the audience?
Sure. The trauma of abandonment is being afraid of being abandoned throughout your entire life via multiple situations. And what happened at birth is that I was separated from my mother. So that trauma at birth of being literally abandoned by my mother stuck with me through my entire life. Just like in adoptees. With adopted children, you listen to their stories. They have the same traumas. They have the exact same traumas as I explain. They're scared to be abandoned. They're afraid to, sometimes in their adopted families, they have a difficult time just settling in and they have a hard time living because they're afraid that these new parents are going to abandon them a second time. And that was my case as well. So throughout my life, my young years, I was a very difficult kid. I could not leave my parents. I would be like hysterical if they left me just like 5 minutes. I mean, I had a really hard time, I have to say, and it went through into my friendships as well because I was scared that my friends would abandon me, so I would suffocate them, and then because I would suffocate them too much, and I would cling on to them. I was so clingy. They'd leave, and so then I would go in a spiral of depression, and then, it just went on and on and on and on. And I mean, I have to say that adoption and surrogacy, there's a lot of similarities, except for the fact that in adoption, of course, we're not purposely creating this trauma. Like it's just life happens, and there are unfortunately kids that are abandoned, and then but in surrogacy, we purposely we create a baby to be abandoned. That's what's terrifying. And I have just one little small word about this. There are four more suicide attempts in children born in children and in adopted children. Four times more suicide attempts in adopted children. So, and that's because they were abandoned at birth by their mother.
And I mean, you do make a distinction there, and I would say a lot of people would make the distinction between adoption and surrogacy in the sense, as you say, you're not deliberately creating that situation, and it's like adoption can redeem, say, a broken situation. I think and also one of the other things, like say in Ireland now, our media is very, I would say, very anti-adoption, and they, I would say, probably highlight the negative aspects rather than the positive aspects, or maybe the redemptive nature of adoption in a lot of people's stories. Like a lot of people will come out and say, I was adopted. If I was born now in Ireland, I probably would never have been born, because there really is, we have a lot of abortion, for example. But one of the things with adoption is that adoptions now in Ireland are open. So I think most of them, if not all, are open. So there's contact with the birth mother. And we obviously had years of mother and baby homes. That's a huge scandal where people had a lot of identity issues because they didn't know their birth parents, and that caused a lot of difficulty. And what I find so interesting about the surrogacy, the whole lobby for surrogacy, is that there is that sense that you're depriving people of information about themselves. We did that for years with mother and baby homes, but yet we don't talk about that with surrogacy when it's literally very intentional. And one of the things in your story as well is that I find this so interesting, that your birth certificate was, so the birth certificates have the names of your parents and not your birth parent. The surrogate is nowhere.
No.
So
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And what happens is that your birth certificate, now you can even have a pre-birth order, so you can order the fake birth certificate at birth, so you have it, directly delivered to you. But my parents, what happens is that I have an original birth certificate, and then the court delivered the fake one and sealed the old one a couple of days later. So on my birth certificate, there is no mention of born via surrogacy, or, you were, or even there's no trace of my birth mother on the birth certificate. So that's why for so many years I doubted myself and my gut instinct, because I didn't know. And I was so persuaded and so naive, thinking that birth certificates could not be faked. For me, it was impossible to fake a birth certificate. How could you? How could you steal the identity of a child? But they do. That's what they do.
Yeah. So even, yeah. So it's almost like it's almost to make, I would say you would argue that's to make the intent of that is to make the surrogate parents feel better, I suppose, or, this is my child, I've gone through this process, which raises the question as well, Olivia, like what would you say to the argument that, a surrogate child, when you think of the expense that's involved, when you think of the whole process and everything that a person has to go through, a couple has to go through to have that child, that is actually a very wanted child. Like,
Mhm.
would you address that in terms of, did you see yourself? Obviously, you were a wanted child and you're here today because of surrogacy.
Of course, I mean you can be wanted. I mean, adoptees are wanted children as well. The adoption process is way harder, way harder. Like there are so many safeguards in adoption that do not exist in surrogacy. Like we don't background check intended parents in surrogacy. So anyone can literally buy themselves a child. So yeah, I mean, of course they go through living hell to get themselves a child, but they don't go through as much hell as in the adoption process. It's a lot easier to buy yourself a child through surrogacy than to get yourself a child through the adoption system. Um, but I guess, I mean, of course, I was wanted. It's not like I felt like I wasn't desired by my parents. It was just, I can't explain it to you. I was just, it's this gut feeling that I knew something was off, that I knew that it wasn't my mother, that I knew what they were telling me, the story that they were telling me, and my identity, it didn't stick. I just had that feeling that even if they wanted me, I knew something was off, and I knew that it wasn't the real me. So unfortunately, yeah, I grew up with a lot of issues concerning that. But yeah, I get told all the time, Olivia, you wouldn't be here if it weren't for surrogacy. But as I respond, you don't say that to children born because of a rape. You wouldn't say that, would you? You you'd never ever say that to a child that's born because his mother got raped. You wouldn't. That's horrible. It's kind of the same thing. It's just this manipulation of emotions, which I find is kind of disgusting. And as I always say, I mean, if I weren't born in this body, I'd be born in another body. So it doesn't really matter. I'm here, and I know I was born via surrogacy, and I know that this is my destiny. I mean, I have to fight against it, and I have to. That's, I mean, it's my it's my plan. It's my life journey.
And you have really dedicated yourself to that. Olivia,
Yes.
yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask was in terms of like you speak out against the industry itself, and I mean we hear a lot about safeguards, a lot about regulation. What's interesting in your story is that when you find out details about your surrogate mother, who was also your birth mother, you find out that she had, various very difficult things in her life and mental health issues. And so that would kind of imply that the checks at that time, and I know this still happens, that the checks were just not robust enough, that someone who had, psychological issues, mental health issues, who was not in a sound place, who was open to being exploited, that they were allowed to go through that process.
Of course, yeah. No, my birth mother, I mean, she did what she had to do because she's a victim in this whole story. I blame surrogates. I find that they are victims because they're the easy prey of the surrogacy lobby and people are making money off of their backs. So yeah, my birth mother, my surrogate mother, was grieving a son she just had lost. He was 2.5 years old. He died in a tragic domestic accident. She was still grieving. She wasn't mentally stable. She was all over the place. She can hold a job, so she needed a job, but she also had 4 other children that she needed to take care of at home. And so surrogacy was kind of the perfect deal. She could stay at home, raise her kids, get money, and yeah, and just not have to find a job. It was the perfect way out for her. I always say that surrogacy is the prostitution of the womb. It's just sometimes you have to it was either she would have to, you know, she had a choice in her life. She either could not feed her children and that would be horrible, or she had surrogacy presented to her and she could be a surrogate and she could feed her children. But there was also a third option that could have been prostitution. So I guess surrogacy was the only option for her at the time. She didn't check the psychological checks at all. She's the perfect example of how they don't. So in certain cases, of course, they do background checks. I'm not saying that they don't, but in a lot of cases, they just kind of don't really go into detail that much. So in my case, and in many other cases today, I mean, if you go to Mexico and you look at the surrogates, they're not wealthy individuals with high IQ, education. They're these poor women that are being completely manipulated, exploited, and mistreated by the surrogacy lobby. And I still have to say, I haven't seen a rich woman carrying a baby for a poor woman. We still have to see that. So yeah, I guess that's.
Did you have the chance to meet your mother, Olivia?
I didn't I didn't get the chance to meet her because she lives in America and I live in France. So going to America is, I mean, it's expensive. I got the chance to meet my half brother because I was sent to the United Nations in New York City last year, so that was great. But I didn't get to meet her because, I mean, she was in another state, so I couldn't see her. And but I did get to talk to her. I did get to talk to her, and that was just the most intense, emotionally intense conversation I've had in my entire life. It was beautiful. Beautiful but heartbreaking at the same time.
And in terms of your relationship with your own parents, and you talk about that you did come from a loving home, that you were in a well-off family, but you make the point that for you, you felt growing up that there were just issues there where love wasn't enough. What is your relationship with your parents like? Because obviously they raised you. Your father is biologically your father.
Yes, he's biologically my father. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the relationship I have with them, I don't have a relationship with them today, I have to be honest. When I started speaking out about surrogacy, they were like, you're trying to get revenge, like, because we didn't tell you the truth and blah, blah, blah. And I told them, like, no, I'm not seeking revenge on you. I don't blame you at all. You had surrogacy because you could. That's the only reason. Um, and and it was served to you on a silver platter. Like today, I'm not fighting against um, intended parents. What I'm fighting against are governments, are lawmakers. That's and in industry, of course. I'm not fighting these people who are just the prey of the surrogacy lobby as well, because they prey on the sadness of these people that can't have children. Um, but today I don't have a relationship with my parents. Unfortunately, like I said, I spoke out about it and they took it they really they didn't take it well. It was horrible. The last conversation I had with my parents was absolutely tragic and they cut me off. They didn't want to speak to me anymore. And we don't speak as of today. So that was in September 2023 and we don't speak at all.
Sorry to hear
Oh,
that.
I knew it was going to happen. Like I said, I had that conflict of loyalty. I felt like I was going to betray them, and I had a choice to make. Either I was free to speak and I would just fight my fight and I would just go all in into this advocacy work against surrogacy because that's profoundly what I want to do, or I would, well, shut up and and still have my parents in my life. And so it was a sacrifice I had to make.
What would you say to the case where the parents or the biological parents of the child and the embryo is implanted into a surrogate, and say you have a family where it is an altruistic form of surrogacy, say someone steps forward and says, I will do this for you, even say a family member. What would you say to a case like that? Do you think that's different?
No, it's not any different for me because we still have the issue where the birth mother is the mother that gives birth to the child. I mean, she's the mother. That's what it is in every single country of the world. The one who gives birth is the mother. In IVF, the mother, even if she's implanted like with an embryo that's not created with her genetic material, we call her the mother. I don't understand why in surrogacy we don't call the surrogate the mother. That there's like, it just doesn't make it make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. So no, it's still ripping away a child from his mother at birth. I mean, she's the one, the surrogate is the one that's going to grow the baby. The baby's going to smell her. He's going to feel her. He's going to want her milk at birth. He's going to want her scent. She's the one that he knows for 9 months. She's the one that he grew in for 9 months. So in the end, at birth, she is the one that he wants. No one else, not a stranger, even if and you have to put yourself in the kind of the head of a little baby newborn. Like we know that at that stage, biology doesn't matter. We don't, the baby doesn't care. He wants his mother, the one that he only knows. We don't separate kittens from their mother for weeks because we know the psychological effects that it'll have on the kittens. Why do we do this to newborn?
Mm. And I'd say, touching on that point, like adoption now, because you could say, well, that's quite similar to that experience, but that is why I would say that you have open adoption now, where there is, like in Ireland, for example, and I think in the UK as well, and in America, that's kind of the progressive form of adoption, because it's better for the mental health of the adoptee, of the birth mother, to have contact. And most of the time they do remain in contact. Like, it's not a closed adoption, probably for those reasons you've discussed. In surrogacy, there's none of that, is there? Is it just a case where, have you heard of any surrogate children who have contact with the surrogate
Actually,
after?
all of the kids that I know have contact with their surrogate mothers, and they've all suffered. All of them. Because they were abandoned. I mean, it's still the same thing. Why? I mean, it's very difficult for them. Very difficult. So they all know their surrogate mothers. They all didn't feel well about it. They're all traumatized. I'm not saying that in all cases surrogate born children are going to be traumatized. Some are going to be fine, you know. They're going to be fine, and thank goodness that they're going to be fine. They're going to live perfect lives, and I'm very happy for them. And you know, that's not the question. The question is, we are literally stepping on the rights of children. The right to know their identity, the right to be raised by their parents, uh, and we're also stepping on the rights of women. So that's the real issue here.
You touched a little bit on the issues of IVF and sperm donation and egg donation, and what you often see, like in big cities. When I lived in London, there was, ads in the tube for, like, sperm banks and egg donations, and that's become quite a common thing. What is your attitude or your position on IVF? Because obviously that is linked very much to surrogacy.
So I make it a point not to talk about any other subject than surrogacy, because that's where we get separated. You know, like if I start talking about IVF and like what I feel about IVF, well, half of the people at the Declaration of Casablanca are going to be like, okay, well, we're not with you anymore, because they're going to have another idea on the subject. I don't talk about IVF. I touched a little bit about adoption, but I don't speak about adoption. Like, I'm not for or against adoption. I think we should listen to adoptees and what they have to say. So I make it a point, yeah, just to stick on the subject of surrogacy. It's really important, because if we start to deviate from that, then we've lost the battle completely.
In your own case, obviously you talk about, I want to go back a little bit to the abandonment. How early on, because obviously you didn't know that you were a surrogate child, how early on did you suffer from what you say, the trauma of feeling abandoned? Like, was that something that started very, very early on in life?
Oh gosh. So my first memories started at like around 6. Before that, I have absolutely no memories. I don't recall my childhood at all. Um, Still haven't figured out why. I just, it's like a black hole. But my first memory, like I can give it to you. It's, we're going skiing, and my parents put me at this, like, the little kid group club thing. and I'm with my ski boots and my skis, and I'm there within the group, and I see my parents from afar, and I'm just hysterically screaming, like crying, bawling, hitting everything. I'm not moving, and they actually had to come and pick me up because I would not move at all, and it was just like that all the time with me, all the time. They try to put me in these kid clubs and never would work ever. So they'd have to take me everywhere, literally everywhere. So it started when I was 6, when I was very young, and maybe before. I just don't remember at all.
And later on, you talk about experiencing issues with dependency on drugs
Yes.
and alcohol.
That's it's all kind of linked with also the identity issue because I wasn't kind of I was trying to fill a void, and that what void was the fact that I didn't know who I was at all. I felt empty. I knew that half of me was missing, and I felt it, and so I tried filling that with alcohol, drugs, and eventually, unfortunately, this whole thing would lead me to being raped. So it was a terrible uh, experience. I had a very complicated adolescence, very complicated young adult life, and yeah, so that's linked to the identity issue because I couldn't literally grow up and build myself as an adult without knowing where I came from and whose I was, who's my mother. That was the big question.
Do you feel that there can ever be an acceptable form of surrogacy?
No, no, no. I don't think that there can ever be an acceptable form of surrogacy because in every single surrogacy, we are programming the abandonment of a child. That's just, once again, we're stepping on their rights. We do have the UN conventions on the rights of the child that normally should be protecting children, but it's not. And we are using women as reproductive vessels for the rich. And all of this is just unacceptable in every form, way altruistic or not. It's still the same thing.
Olivia, would you have a message, final message to someone who's watching or to an Irish lawmaker who is supportive of the legislation that we have in place? Like, do you have a message as a surrogate child that you want to end on?
I would say that people should read about surrogacy. They should open contracts. They should see all of the work that we're doing at the Casablanca Declaration. They should listen to our conferences. They should just educate themselves because policymakers, the problem is that they're either for or against surrogacy, but when you really talk to them, they have no idea why they're for surrogacy or why they're against. It's kind of a weird thing going on. So sometimes I have to sit down with them and explain to them, like point by point, why surrogacy is so wrong. And at the end of the conversation, they get out with all these arguments and they're very happy. So yeah, follow us at the Casablanca Declaration, inform yourself, read, and open your eyes on the surrogacy market and this multi-billion-dollar industry that has to end now.
Olivia, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really fascinating and we really, really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.